collaboration division, and his responsibilities include market trend analysis, what do you call that? Customer research for web and data conferencing. And during the past 6 months or so, I actually had some opportunity to work with Ravi on some of the concepts that he's going to talk about. And with that,
thanks, Jan. So I'm a product planner. I focus primarily on live meeting, but also tend to do research across the broader space for real-time collaboration. Are people familiar with what real-time collaboration is and the business unit? Okay, so it's a business unit led by Anup Gupta, okay? And products include live meeting as well as live communication server. So both web conferencing as well as the instant messaging and presence side. So over the past few months, I've worked with a number of people across marketing as well as the product team, including Paul Haverstock, who's here as well today, to really think about some longer-term problems that RTC users and non-RTC users face today. And the idea was to really break away from just thinking about what we could deliver in the next release and think about some things that are a little longer term. So as part of this concept testing project, we really thought about, OK, what are a handful of problems, customer problems, that we can solve? And then what are potential solutions to those problems? I'm showing here a concept car because I think that the automotive industry does this very, very well. This is a concept car from Alfa Romeo. And you look at this car and you might think, wow, I may never see this car ever driven around on the streets, actually. But we all very well may one day own cars that use technology that was involved with creating the body panels, creating the windows, creating the tires, creating the brakes. So that's the type of approach we used. And we created a handful of concepts that may not actually be turned into products as they exist today, but the capabilities probably will be included in some iteration of our products down the road. So the idea was really to test these things with end users, okay, so information workers, as well as business decision makers, to see what were the benefits, what was the value proposition, and what were some of the drawbacks for these concepts. And using that feedback, we can then prioritize the scenarios and build the best products going forward. And really, in the course of this discussion, please stop me if you have any questions. I definitely want it to be a discussion. And part of the reason Young invited me to talk is because I hope this can just be part of the continuing engagement that RTC has with Microsoft Research to take this feedback, think about the challenges and problems, and think about how we can solve these problems with technology. So please stop me if you have any questions. In thinking about what we would build in terms of concepts, we started by brainstorming customer pain points. And these are pain points based on previous research, expertise from folks involved with generating the concepts, as well as previous customer interaction. And we really decided to focus on 3 areas. The first was around better real-time document collaboration. So when you think about document collaboration today, people think about, OK, you have SharePoint, which is very asynchronous. Okay? And then a little bit of an improvement on that are what you can do with application sharing today, which is essentially akin to you have a document that 2 people want to work on, but you only have 1 pen. So you take turns and pass the baton. We wanted to think about an environment where people can work at the same time, almost in a co-editing sense. So that was one of the problems we wanted to address. A second is really about finding information and expertise. So the hypothesis here is people engage in real-time communication to find something. That something is either inside, an information system, or some expert has information that you need. So we wanted to think of ways to allow people to easier tap into that information and expertise. Lastly, we thought about ways that people can work better on a distributed team. So how can we allow people to work with remote team members and a virtual team more effectively? So what we did, where we thought about each of these problems and created a storyboard around a 2 to 4 minute scenario that addressed each problem. We created flash demos around each of these scenarios and then tested these demos with end users in focus group style research in August. So we actually did 60 interviews with BDMs and IWs across people who both used RTC tools today. So they used IM for work, they used web conferencing, as well as people who didn't, to really understand how the feedback differed across those different subsegments. We talked about a number of things. We talked about pain points. We talked about how relevant the concepts were. Within each concept, we had more detailed discussions around features and how appealing individual features were, as well as benefits, drawbacks, challenges, scenarios. There's a whole lot of information today. What I'm going to do is actually a surface pass across all the concepts. I'll show some of the demos. Just due to time, I won't be able to show them all, but they're definitely available for you to view at your leisure after the session. So first, I'm going to talk about some high-level themes. In terms of general feedback, people were overwhelmingly positive about the potential for RTC, and this was universal across all of the concepts. There were plenty of concerns people had, but generally, the value propositions for these concepts were fairly clear. People were able to articulate specific usage scenarios and saw the value there. In terms of general acceptance, we found that RTC users, so people who had experience using these tools, actually saw even more value. So it was almost as if their experience had convinced them that there are even more applications for this technology than they previously thought. So that was another common theme. Another theme was this idea of critical mass. So one of the major concerns or qualifiers that people had across the concepts was that they would use the technology as long as all their friends did. So they really felt like the value in these technologies was in a broad network of users, and that if you can assure them that that network would be sufficiently large, then they would invest the time to learn the tool and use it. But that was a major qualifier for most of these concepts. Another common theme, and we'll talk about this quite a bit, is the theme of control. So while real-time collaboration allows you to share things more easily, more effectively, it became clear that we cannot do that unless we provide people with the means to maintain control over their document and content. This gets back to security issues and quality of input and a number of other issues that we'll talk about, but this is a common theme that we have to keep in mind. The other idea is the idea of size. A number of the scenarios we'll be talking to show very small group sizes. In some cases, it's a one-on-one interaction. In some cases, it's a group of 3 or 4 people. People tended to have radically different input based on whether the group size for using a particular tool was 2 or 3 people or 5 or 6. And people felt like some of the scenarios would actually degrade radically in terms of end-user experience if the group size was large. And what you might think of large as being maybe 20, 30 people, we found end users actually felt that in some cases a 5 or 6 person group was large. So one of the themes is we need to sort of recalibrate how we think about scenarios. Yes?
What about the size of the enterprise? You have a large organization, this is small. Is there a difference?
Yeah. So that's a good point. And everyone we talked to was from a large organization. So 1,000 employees or more was the cutoff there. But I think that's definitely another point we need to investigate in terms of applicability across those different groups. In terms of the general pain points, we started with a discussion of general pain points for RTC. So we really wanted to understand what were the underlying motivations and needs and drivers for people to use RTC today. We provided them with a list and had them rank the list and then articulate why they felt certain pain points were at the top of the list versus the bottom of the list. What we tended to find was the spread between all 7 was actually relatively small. So number 7, interacting with people outside their company, that's actually not low in terms of criticality, but it was relatively lower than the other 7 in the list. The interesting thing here was the top 2 were actually very strong and universal across most of the people we talked to in terms of collaborating with the remote team members and interacting with people inside their company tended to stand out as being far and away the top 2 pain points. I think that this view actually gets more interesting when you start to look at different audiences that we talk to. In fact, when you look across people who use RTC tools today and non-users, there's a delta in terms of the pain points that are driving their use of the tools. People who use RTC actually find more difficulty in the working aspects of collaborating. They feel like they can find the people they need to collaborate with, but they want the actual collaborative process to be better. They want better document collaboration. They want better interaction with remote team members. This was actually radically different than people who didn't use web conferencing today, didn't use IM today. They felt like the greater pain point, the greater challenge, was actually in finding people to collaborate with. They actually felt like once they found the people they needed to work with, the means they used, either just a phone call or setting up a physical meeting, those were okay. They felt. It was almost as if they didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't have the experience of what could be a better solution. So they felt like what they were doing was okay. It just wasn't a huge pain point. I think this is important to call out in terms of if, going forward, a large part of our market are people who are new users, right? It's an emerging market. We need to make it easier for people to connect with others and find people, since that is one of the top pain points they have today. So that's one implication there. Next, yes?
Is that, but it seems like that would be, that feeling might be kind of fragile though. Like if they find out that their neighbors are using this better tool or something like that, and they see them doing it, then they might be like no longer as satisfied with, what they're.
I think exactly, and I think one of the points here is we need to track these pain points as someone goes from a non-user to a user and see how the shift occurs. I think the interesting thing here, though, is if you're selling to a company that's a non-RTC using company, then this might be one of the more severe pain points and could help you in providing value to that company right off the start without fighting that hurdle to begin with.
I thought you meant actually in terms of if they started using some RTC solution, like be it ours or somebody else's, they might also have, that effect might still be in play, right? Like even though the tool is broken in some way, they might feel like, oh, well, this is coming better than before, and then again there.
On the slide, it talks about accessing the resources, and verbally you refer to sort of finding the people. Can you comment more on what it means by resources in terms of what you actually got from them? In other words, were they having a problem finding the document on which they wanted to collaborate, or were they trying to actually find their collaborator? In which sense was resource being used?
They're finding an answer to a question or information, and in absence of finding a document, they don't know where to look. They know the person. So it may be a document that isn't searchable. It may be something that's not in a document. It's in someone's head. It's expertise. So when I said resources, it actually means people. It could mean documents. It could mean expertise in some system, or maybe not. So it means all of those things.
So it looks like the problem you stated is harder than the RTC itself. It's like, if you want to do something, you don't know who you want to work with. So, right? Or if you know the person, you don't know if the person wants to work with you. It's something deeper than that. It's not really an RTC issue, right?
It's probably more collaboration than social collaboration.
It's a social networking.
Social
Right.
Ravi, it looks like you actually added some of the knowledge interchange into your scenarios.
Exactly.
So that addresses some of these requirements.
Exactly. So, any other comments? Yes?
So one hypothesis was that once they become an RTC user, well, now that problem is solved. Well, another hypothesis is, well, it isn't solved. You're just having more of a problem with that. Do you know which one of these is true? The top one says, well, I'm having problems with sort of the operational aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Does it actually, they actually solve the problem of being able to find the things that they're looking for and who to collaborate with? Or is it that they're still having that same problem, but now it's dwarfed by the problem of trying to use the thing?
Yeah.
Which is the case?
I think the answer is we don't know until we test that migration across someone who hasn't used the tools to what they use. I think what we find is the fact that all of these pain points are significant, even though there is a rank order, shows that it doesn't go away. It just becomes relatively less severe, which is the latter point you were trying to make.
I guess along with that question, when in the first one, when you do talk about when they do find the tools, are we talking about the same tool? Like, are they trying to use the same tool to do the connections and to actually go and do the RTC itself, or are they doing like IM or something to go and find the people they need and then?
You know, it varies. It varies from email to IM to phone call. It's not always the same tool.
Okay.
So it's a number.
So they use a different channel to do SIP of some kind, be it analog or yelling across the hall or something. Then they
exactly. And
okay.
It runs the gamut of exactly from yelling to using email to IM. Across BDMs and IWs, we also found a delta between the primary pain points across those groups. BDMs, so these are people who are departmental heads or manage a team, found a greater pain with starting spontaneous meetings and finding resources. It was almost as if they saw more pain in immediate issue resolution and connecting with people. Whereas IWs, people who were more individual contributors, found a greater challenge in working on documents, so getting their individual work done, as well as collaborating with their remote team. So the important point here is when you think about end users, to think along the two axes. Think along, is someone an RTC user or not? And think along, are they an individual contributor or are they a BDM? And by thinking along those variables, you can start to understand the primary motivations and drivers for those groups. I think there's a lot more research we need to do here, but it's an important point to call out. And as I go through the concepts, I'll talk to the feedback and stress how these groups tended to differ in terms of what popped from each of the demos. So I'm going to walk through the demos in the following order. So closely linked collaboration stood out far and away as the #1 concept. This is really a co-editing scenario. It shows two people working together on a document. Then I'll talk to think tank, which is an idea of finding people and information in an easy way, in an integrated way. Loosely linked collaboration is an idea of co-editing once again, but in a much more serendipitous and free-form way, showing not only two people, but 4 or 5 people working together on a single document. Live team sites is actually a new take on a team site that includes a number of new capabilities around streaming audio, voice over IP audio, video presence, as well as easier document collaboration. And then we'll talk to Smart Buddy Lists, which is a new way to contextually find people and information as you're working on a document. So first I'll show closely linked collaboration. I just want to comment that these demos are very high level and that the technology isn't necessarily, of course, this is all very exploratory and conceptual. And really the point was to tell a story with the demos, to elicit feedback. So just keep that in mind.
Alice prepares budget and revenue forecasts for the company, receiving data from various department managers. She is currently reviewing the data for accuracy before preparing a summary for the company's CFO. Taking advantage of new technologies, Alice can easily contact anyone associated with her forecast document and perform real-time document sharing and co-editing. She doesn't have to worry about document versioning or manually develop paper trails, since this is taken care of automatically. Let's take a quick look at how this helps Alice prepare a report. Alice is looking at the latest sales forecast. While reviewing the document, Alice notices sales projections for one region seem too low. She decides to contact Bob, the global sales manager for this region, to go over his data. Because Bob edited the document previously, an icon appears next to his name in her contact list, indicating that he has previously edited or authored the document. In addition, Alice can see Bob is currently available online. Using her computer, Alice calls Bob by clicking on his name. Bob, meanwhile, is working in his office. He answers Alice's call, and they discuss her concerns using their computer's built-in speakers and microphones. They decide to go over the figures together. Alice sees a speaker icon next to his name, indicating that an audio conversation is underway. To co-edit the workbook with Bob, Alice drags an icon of her file over to Bob's name. The indicator lets Alice know her Excel workbook is ready to share. A small icon also appears next to Bob's name, indicating a co-editing invitation was sent. Bob receives the co-editing invitation from Alice and accepts. Alice can see that Bob has accepted the session. The icons next to the document itself and Bob's name both appear, indicating that the co-editing session has begun. Bob is now able to see exactly what Alice is showing on her computer. In fact, Bob can see Alice's cursor on his screen. As Alice makes edits, he can see them on his computer in real time. After looking at the figures, Bob realizes his projections may be too conservative. In fact, he notices several of them need to be adjusted. He clicks and changes some of the numbers. The cell changes colors so that Alice can see what he has changed. While Bob revises the Northeast Regional sales data, Alice updates other figures with new information. Since they are working in the same document at the same time, any changes made become instantly available. It's easy to see what changes were made and who made them. After a brief chat, they both agree the changes were appropriate. Alice ends the collaborative session. Alice now has the final version of the document showing all of Bob's changes highlighted and tagged. She is able to put the finishing touches on her report well ahead of the deadline. With the new technologies in place, Alice and Bob were able to collaborate and co-edit easily. The technology helped streamline the collaborative process so Alice could complete her analysis faster and more accurately.
So that was closely linked collaboration. In terms of general appeal overall, this was the #1 concept in terms of general ranking. Also, two of the features, particularly the tagged edits feature and the co-editing feature, in a prioritization exercise at the end of each focus group, those two individual features bubbled up as the two top features overall across all 5 concepts and 25 capabilities that we tested. I guess the reasons for this were that people really saw clear use cases for this type of scenario. So with two people working together at the same time, the use cases included everything from ad hoc, urgent actions like working together to craft an email, working together to quickly edit some numbers, such as what this scenario showed, as well as uses in broader processes, such as creating a business plan, working on an RFP, working on a budgeting document, or something a little more involved with a business process. People were able to see the value. They were also not intimidated by it. They felt that, okay, this is an easy way for me to get my job done. It's an easy way for me to make sure the context of the discussion is understood because we're both looking at the same document and we can see what each other's doing. And therefore, the value is pretty clear. In terms of what really popped from this scenario, the tagged edits individually, actually, let me just explain the rating system here. We showed each group the concept and had them rate on a scale of 1 to 7 how valuable each individual capability was to the concept itself. So that's the rating scales, with high being better, low being worse. In terms of the #1 feature, tagged edits tended to stand out. And this goes back to the initial theme I talked about across all concepts, where people felt like the ability to control the interaction and monitor what's happening is really, really critical. So in the concept, we showed the case where you can see what someone else is working on. The cell changes shades of color, and you can see what the edit is happening there. People felt that if you're going to have a co-editing scenario with two people or even 3 or 4, you need some way to monitor what people are doing, and you need to make sure that the leader or initiator of that session has a way to check what other people are doing and approve or reject. Similar to the way we have track changes today in Office, people need some sort of a reviewing mechanism for the real-time environment as well. Yes?
I was thinking one thing that, especially since this is, like, as opposed to, I mean, I think the track changes stuff in Word, for instance, is really nice and works really well, but it's meant to be used in kind of an asynchronous way where you go and make a lot of changes, whereas here, you have a bunch of people synchronously putting in a lot of different changes. And I think one thing that, I forget where I've seen this, but I think a concept that might make sense here is timeline-based versioning. So you can literally go back to any second in time, and whatever level of changes, all the people who contributed there, you get that snapshot. So it's like continuous versioning, basically.
Right, right.
And, yeah, that's something to think about there.
So in terms of the concerns with this concept, there were concerns about the scalability across large group sizes. I'll talk more about this point on another concept that really touched on this issue, but people felt like pushing up to 3, 4, 5 people, it could become unmanageable to make sure you aren't stepping on other people's toes when you're working on the same document. Also, a quick comment on VoIP. People just generally were not convinced of the sound quality of VoIP. Now, part of that was because people weren't using it, so they really didn't know what to expect. They were running on their perception. Now, when we would say, assume the sound quality is equal to your phone experience today, then they'd be swayed. But their initial perception was, well, I don't know how good the quality would be, so that explains the lower ranking for VoIP there.
I noticed the comment you have about the fear of being overrun with invites, which I can understand. And one question I was going to ask about the UI is, it wasn't clear to me why you'd get this yes/no dialogue on the other side. Because if it's someone you're collaborating with and they're opening a document to you, I mean, do you have anything to lose as a receiver by opening? I mean, unless there's a virus or something. You know, but other than that, it seems like you'd always want to.
So what we found was anything that gives people a sense of control tended to rank more highly. So that dialogue just gives the recipient a sense of control to say, yes, now's a good time, or no, now's not a good time. And that was the reason we included that in there. So,
I mean, but perhaps that could be more implicit. Like if you start the chat with somebody, or the voice chat, you know, like at that level, if you've already opened up a real-time voice communication with someone, then you might have an implicit level of permission, and then you could kind of reduce the load on the users by not having to deal with like.
Exactly. That's a good point. Exactly. Yes?
What is the integration story with SharePoint portal? This would be a very nice feature for the SharePoint portal.
Exactly, and we have a concept around live team sites that actually talks about how something like this might work from SharePoint and what it would look like there. I think SharePoint is one initiation point that it makes sense to look at further. So the next concept I'll talk about is loosely linked collaboration. This also deals with a co-editing scenario. It's a little more free-form.
Melissa, a business manager at Contoso Corporation, is preparing for the annual business plan review the following week. She is responsible for managing the creation of the business plan with a team of department managers. With the assistance of new technologies, Melissa and her team can work together on the same content at the same time. They can utilize the power of spontaneous collaboration to get things done quickly and accurately. Let's look at how this helps Melissa and her team prepare for their review. When the process started, Melissa posted the business plan PowerPoint on the team portal. Since this is the main document that will be presented during the following week's review, her teammates are frequently editing and reviewing the content to make sure that the business plan is as high quality as possible. She decides to open the plan and make a few changes. Melissa can see that John, the marketing manager, happens to be working in the document. Since John was not part of the original team, he only has permission to review and make comments, not edit the plan. As Melissa continues to work on the document, she sees more comments appear from John. She reads one of John's comments where he mentions a way to improve this section of the business plan. Melissa decides to ask him about his ideas for the slide using the chat area to ask a few questions. John describes an idea he has for the plan. Melissa likes his idea and gives him permission to make changes to the marketing section while she works on another section. Melissa can see where John is in the document. As he makes changes, the text appears highlighted. Because he set an alert on the document earlier, Chris, the finance director, sees a small pop-up letting him know the document has people working on it. Chris is interested in edits that others might be making to the document. He also has financial data to add as well. He therefore decides to join the session. Upon joining, he reviews the recent chat history between John and Melissa to get up to speed. Meanwhile, John completes his changes. He lets Melissa and Chris know, offering to show them the finished slide. Melissa and Chris both receive an invitation to view John's edits. They accept, which allows John to direct their views to his recent changes. Everyone is now looking at exactly what John wants them to see in the document. They all agree with the edits, and John leaves the document. After John departs, Melissa and Chris continue to review and make changes to the document. With the new technologies in place, Melissa and the team are able to collaborate easily and spontaneously. There is no need to merge content from different team members, since all edits can happen right in the context of the same document. In fact, with a big meeting a week away, Melissa is feeling very confident about having a great business plan to present.
Okay. So, looking at the capability rankings, you can see what popped out as being most critical. One being trust control. So, one of the ideas for this concept was really to allow someone to control who can edit and who can just comment on the document. People felt that that extra level of control and permissions was required for any sort of environment where you allow people to make changes in a very, free-form ad hoc way. Also, one of the major benefits from this was really the ability for people to do their work when they see fit. So it didn't require two people to do the exact same work on the same document at the same time. It provided them more leeway, whether or not someone else was in the document or whether or not they were ready to work on it or not. They were able to monitor what was happening and really manage their own time and get the work done and work together more effectively. In terms of the general use cases, people found it a great way to work on large compound documents, things like business plans or large RFPs or certain legal documents that might require input from multiple functional areas. People felt that this sort of concept really stood out and provided clear value for those. In terms of the rants, people felt that, once again, document alerts. So we showed the idea of being able to get a notification whenever changes were made to a certain document. And this was really polarizing. Some people said, there's no way I would ever do that. It would be spamming. Other people felt like, well, it would be OK as long as I had some ways to manage those and really restrict the number of alerts I got from different documents. In terms of other rants, some IWs, information workers, considered this intrusive or almost Big Brother-like in terms of people watching what they were doing and having to think on the spot and make edits, and maybe someone else can see the edits they're making. They make a spelling mistake, and someone else says, hey, you misspelled that. So there are a number of concerns along those lines. Some IWs felt that they thought better when they took time, made their edits offline, then merged them back, and they had better quality. Yes?
Along those lines, did anybody worry about, I think the persistent chat's an interesting idea, but the concern I'd have potentially is that, chat tends to be very free-form and open, and then someone else, like this John guy, comes in and reads it. I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the insights here is the idea, so the value there is the history.
Yeah.
People felt like going to the document and having some record, we showed it in the form of a chat, but you can think of any number of artifacts you could put in there. That was super valuable, right? Provided the context. Now, people said, well, what if I make a comment maybe about someone else on the team? So, oh, hey, see that slide? You know, that's garbage. And then someone else goes and sees that in the history. It could provide some issues there. So
I mean, there could be a permission story there. I mean, something where basically, like, you can show that if you're looking at a relevant region of the document, it could highlight a region of a chat, but the chat and its participants would be labeled, but the text itself would be blocked out. And then you'd request permission from those people, which could add to the spamming, but, but
right.
at the same time could give, you know, a level of medium privacy or something.
Right. Right.
One thing you could also do is have maybe an intermediate state between total collaboration and completely offline, where the guy branches off, works for a while, and then has the ability to check it in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Ravi?
Yes.
What makes this scenario possible is a document-based presence. And that received the lowest average, and it also, I think that's where people, you know, did not like that Big Brother thing, watching
Right.
them all the time. So were there any feedback on how we can make presence a little bit more friendly and less scary?
Yeah, some people preferred anonymity. So they said, you know, let me know when there's a change, but I don't, you know, don't say who did it. Give me, you know, a little bit of privacy in terms of what I'm doing and when I do what I do. So I think that's one thing. I think the document-based presence was really critical for the people that were actually building and owning those documents, almost as a task management type tool to know when their team was, when updates were being made to a document that they own or are responsible for. So there's more value for those users than others. Yeah.
Is there an issue about where the original document resides? So, like, you're in one company, I'm in another company, and we're working on this document. I want my own copy. I don't want it sitting on your server.
So we didn't talk explicitly about that. I think that's a valid concern. I think one of the benefits for closely linked and loosely linked is you don't have to fork a document and then remerge it. It's just one document. Less email traffic, less collating, and things like that. So to that extent, people are expecting it to be, you know, one single item that they work on, irrespective of where you are. I think permissions then play into consideration there. If you start to include external people, how do you manage what they see in a document that might have multiple sections? So next I'll talk about think tank. I'll show this concept. It really gets at the idea of finding people, experts, as well as documents in one simple way. This includes capabilities that the KI Knowledge Interchange team is working on heavily already. And let's take a look.
Amy works in sales for Contoso Services. She just received an RFP from a major customer marked urgent. The RFP asks for several services Amy has never dealt with before. In fact, she's not sure her company has the expertise needed to fulfill the requirements. With a very short deadline, she must act quickly. Luckily, Contosa recently installed several new technologies, enabling her to connect easily with people and information throughout the organization. Amy navigates to the think tank. This is a place where she can go to search across people and documents that might be relevant to her. She enters a few keywords based on the RFP to initiate a search. The search results appear suggesting relevant documents. In addition, the results include people with knowledge in the areas suggested by the keywords. The icons help Amy readily identify people she knows based on her communication history from those she doesn't, as well as who is online and available for chat or offline. Finding another proposal that looks relevant, Amy drags it into the conversation window. As she drags the document, the name of the document's author is added to the search results list. Amy decides to invite the author, Tom, to join her in the think tank for a chat. Amy has worked with Tom on other proposals, so the system highlights Tom as someone Amy knows. Tom knows that Mary has worked with this customer before and would have valuable information for the new RFP. He enters Mary's name in the shared search box. Mary's icon appears in the updated search results. Since Amy doesn't know Mary, Tom invites Mary to the think tank. He introduces Mary to Amy and leaves the conversation. As they chat, Mary drags a document from her hard drive into the think tank for Amy. Armed with new information, Amy feels confident she can complete the RFP easily, so Mary leaves the conversation. Amy decides to save the results of her think tank research for future needs. Since the results save dynamically, Think Tank will continuously augment the results with new documents and people as they become available. She can easily access the search results and documents collected at any time. The new Think Tank technologies provided Amy easier and faster access to corporate information and relevant people. By leveraging personal networks, she was able to complete her work in record time and produce a better proposal for her customer.
So it was unanimous that people felt across all of the groups that there's a lot of pain with finding people and information. So everyone agreed that that was definitely one of the major pain points they have. In terms of what really stood out, finding people really made this concept pop. So searching across people, also saving the search so that they can reference it again. People felt that they were doing the same searches repetitively, time and time again. Being able to monitor a search or save a search or catalog it was something they found a lot of value in. Yes?
A little bit about the thinking of, because I was wondering what you might use, what kind of information you might leverage to do that search. I mean, are you thinking about like mining people's emails to make a profile, I mean, that kind of stuff, or is it just like keywords they list themselves? Or?
You know, so there's a team called the Knowledge Interchange team, which some of you might have worked with, that has done a lot of this thinking in terms of exactly looking at emails, looking at profiles that are generated by a system. In terms of feedback from this concept, it was very clear that people did not want to do work to establish these profiles. So that was one thing. So the upfront work had to be minimal as possible. Secondly, it had to be accurate. So there had to be some way for the profile to be revised and automatically generated over time. And then there had to be a sense of security around who can find me, who can contact me. So really those three sort of qualifiers or requirements played into this. Assuming all of those were there, people said yes. Finding the person is key because in an ideal world, if everything was in a document and I can search the documents, I wouldn't need to go through the person. But you know, people just said, yeah, I'm just going to need to talk to the person to find the right info.
So like in this case, is what's happening. I was a little confused about the John-Mary connection because I was thinking that, like, well, if the system already knew Mary's profile, I could have told her directly, but maybe this is a privacy thing where since she doesn't know Mary, you're saying that, you know, John's kind of the in-between person you have to go through to get to her? Is that the thing?
That's one issue. So it could be a privacy type issue. Also, we showed Mary dragging a document from her hard drive. So if your hard drive isn't indexed, then how do you share that piece of information?
It was also showing that the first woman didn't know that Mary had worked on this kind of proposal.
Right.
But Tom's name had come up with someone she knew, and he was the one who knew about Mary. So that was only in Tom's head. In that case, there was no representation.
There's no record.
So really, this is just a different spin on search to include people as part of the search, and it really stood out with a clear value. The one other piece I want to talk to is the personal networks. So we touched on it a little bit, and I think we need to do more work here in terms of testing this scenario. So we showed a case where Tom came in and introduced Mary to Amy. Now, people said, well, that's great that Tom was able to bring Mary in, but Amy would be, most people felt that they would be more than comfortable just sending an email to the person. So they felt like they didn't need to go through a third party to contact someone else. Once they knew who that person was, they would just send an email off. Now, that said, that might differ across external contacts, internal contacts, large company, small company, but the general feeling was just give me the name of the person, I'll contact them myself. I don't need to go through some other person.
But I think it's actually the return path that you have to think about, because they might be perfectly comfortable sending a message to Mary, but Mary might be like, I don't care, because the person has no relevance to them. And in fact, John, or whoever the middle person was, Tom, doing the recommendation to her, I think actually helps with,
exactly.
her pay attention.
Exactly. So that's why this low score might be a little bit misleading in terms of the general value it has. Yes?
Having to make a decision on the spot that Amy have already all the information needed, that was a strange part. In the sense that we're already in a real-time collaboration. Many people are already talking to each other. You drag a document to somebody, they have to have enough time to read the document to decide, there is enough information for me to complete my task. And that is why email or asynchronous communication is important. Maybe later, like Amy want to say, hey, this document doesn't have what I want. So that is kind of a little bit, I felt.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yes?
It seems that there's wider potential for search of people's expertise. Like, you can see two scenarios. I guess one of them is sending information that you think people might be interested in, but you don't know who that is, and you don't want the distribution to be too broad, but you want it to be as targeted as possible. So you could think of it as targeted advertising,
almost like a DL that is.
And you analyze. I've got all my stuff indexed by stuff I've seen. And people could tell what you're interested in, and then use that for targeted advertisement as kind of a. I just sent out a talk announcement this morning. I couldn't figure out what the audience was.
Right.
So something like that might help. And the other place that I see search being useful is just asking a question, not for working on a document necessarily, but anybody know why this piece of code isn't working or something, and it just goes to 3 or 4 people that are most likely to be able to answer that.
Yeah, I think the first part of what you mentioned, almost a community of interest. So who would be interested in receiving this type of information? It seemed like you were getting at.
Yeah.
Actually, in one of the last concepts, we tested that idea with external people. So generating a list of people outside your company with a common interest group that you can contact. So I think that is definitely another application of, once you have the expertise information, there are a number of things you can do with it, and that could be one of them. Yes?
Just one thing. You can use KI today. You can install it and use it. We've been using it for a while. Actually, one of our external customers will be using it with 100 people there, and it's got a lot of these neat features, things like anonymity and privacy, where you could say, I'm an expert in these things, but be anonymous. So if somebody asks a question to the server, comes back with results, they send you an email, they don't know who you are. If you're interested, you could go back and contact them. So yeah, talk to Bobby Kishore and install this. It's a good tool.
It's called what? KI?
KI, Knowledge Interchange.
Just quickly, I'm going to move on. I'll talk about live team sites. So the idea of this was to break away from the traditional thinking around what a SharePoint team site is that's really focused on very structured tasks, projects, and paint a picture of an environment that's much more free-form, a place where people might hang out. It has their documents, but it's a much more free-form collaborative environment.
David is a marketing manager for Contoso Corporation. Currently, he is working on a launch plan for a new product. His company recently added a new collaboration technology to help people work together more effectively, regardless of where they are located. This helps David a lot since he is frequently on the road but needs to stay in close contact with his team. David is currently working remotely from his hotel while traveling on business. He navigates to the team site to continue working on the product launch plan. On the live team site, there are a number of capabilities that allow members to interact in real time. But the first thing that David notices is a casual audio conversation that is going on. Team members can use their PC microphones and speakers to have a conversation with anyone else that is visiting the site at that time. In fact, David can see an attendee list. This is a list of people that are not only online, but are actually visiting the site at this very moment. The audio icon shows which members are currently using the audio feature, and the waves indicate who is currently speaking. Also, the camera icon indicates several team members are also using webcams. David decides to turn on his webcam and audio. This allows him to take part in real-time conversations as if everyone working in the team site was really in the same room. Let's take a look at these capabilities in action.
Hi folks, David here. Andy, I just entered the live team site, but overheard you and Joe discussing the product launch. FYI, we just locked down the dates for the kickoff event. It's scheduled for November 15th in New York City.
Okay, I'll update that day on the project plan and make sure we have some great demos ready. This is good news.
Yeah, great. I'll start working with event planning to nail down logistics.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Lauren. David just booked a location for the kickoff event, so you and I should get together soon and discuss promotional materials we might need.
No problem. Let's talk about this tomorrow.
Lauren, by the way, we need to update the launch plan with the latest ideas for the ad campaign. Do you have a few minutes to work with me on that right now? I need to get the latest draft to management ASAP.
Okay, give me a few minutes and I will be ready.
Sounds good. I'll send you an invite in 5 minutes.
The audio capability allowed David to overhear and participate in conversations that he wouldn't have otherwise known about. The video allows him to visually see who is talking and what they are doing. While waiting for Lauren to get ready, David decides to check his email. However, even with his email covering the live team site, he is able to see what is happening. He receives real-time alerts of important site activities, whether he is in other applications or even not logged on to the live team site at all. After a few minutes, David goes back to the live team site. He notices that the alert he received is also recorded in the site activity log. This allows someone who joins the site to catch up on the latest updates that have been made. Browsing over the documents on the site, he notices that the live team site gives him an instant picture of not only who is in the site, but what they are working on as well. As the alert indicated, he sees that Joe is working on the revenue projections with Andy. If he chooses, he may join their session with a single click. However, since he wants to collaborate with Lauren, he simply drags the appropriate file to her name in the attendee list. Lauren sees David's request and accepts. They instantly start collaborating, well on their way to finishing a great launch plan. Even though David is thousands of miles away from his team, the live team site allows...
I'll just pause the ending there. Okay, so live team sites. A few things to comment about this. First of all, it was really all about the document. We showed a lot of things there. We showed video. We showed this persistent voice-over IP conversation that just pervades the whole site. And people really felt that the major draw for that site was the document, and that's what will pull them to the site, and that's what they do there. They felt like even though the story was around people hanging out at a site, that they would really not hang out at the site. They would go there if they had a specific task to do. So some action item, some task, some document to work on, that's what would pull them into the site. Now, once they were there, they felt that the site-specific presence, so we showed the presence list showing not just who's online, but who's actually viewing that page at that time, was really valuable to track who's doing what, and also in the context of a voice conversation, know who's saying what, so they can know where the different conversations are coming from. Yes.
The site that Ravi showed, it could be a SharePoint portal, so that relates back to your original question there.
In terms of general rants or concerns, there was a pretty big polarization for this site in terms of the value primarily around the video presence area. Now, IWs felt that wow, that's totally Big Brother. I would never use it. I would hide under my desk, some people said. It was just a general concern people had working in cubicle environments and just, okay, I don't want people to watch what I'm doing, and who knows, maybe if I don't know, maybe I had a bad hair day or something like that, people would say. On the other hand, BDMs actually felt that it was really great. It was a great way for them to supervise, keep on track. So, keep on track of who's doing what, and for more structured team-type meetings, that it could be valuable to be able to see the speaker. Okay, so especially when you have multiple speakers. So they felt there was value there, but people were either very, very against it or thought it was really valuable. So there was a lot of polarization there across that feature.
So was the idea of the prototype that it was always on? That somebody, or was there an active step to jump in the room?
Yeah, so actually it started out where these were blanked and there's a button here that says click to turn on audio video. Okay. So you had the option to turn it on or off. The individual contributor said, I would never turn it on, it would always have to be off. The BDM said, well, I'd love to see everyone else, just to monitor and supervise and keep track of what people are doing. In terms of the general theme around the concept, it's clear that even though we painted this picture of almost like a war room where people can come and go as they please, very sort of free form, people felt that they wanted to see more of a project-type approach to it, more tasks, more notes, more of a structure, so that they had more of a reason to be there. Otherwise, they didn't feel like they would hang out at this site. The few that felt they would were telecommuters, so they spent most of their time actually working from home, and they thought, well, yeah, I'd hang out there. But aside from that group of folks, people felt like they needed more of a specific reason. Other comments? Questions?
Any of users suggested, any of the reasons that they want to be there in this particular site?
Well, document collaboration, they felt that the drag and drop to start working on a Word document, seeing who's working on a document at a given time as an entry point to join that document was something people felt was really useful. Going back to the loosely linked collaboration concept where we had the chat history, so you can catch up on a record, the recent activity, people felt that they can keep up to date on what's happened on the site and where progress is. So those were some of the major draws to the site and why people would go. Yes?
Yeah, this is a comment that applies particularly to this one, maybe some of the others. A few weeks ago, somebody from Intel gave a couple talks here. I don't know if you heard her, either or both of her presentations, but they talked about this concept of an asynchronous meeting, which
Ravi was there.
Right. Okay, so yeah, and she talked about it. They talked about it more at length at another meeting, and the idea is that people who are working on a distributed team in particular might block out like a 48-hour period where they would agree to a higher level of interrupt and a higher level of attention because they have some sort of a deadline. And it seems like a very natural addition to this kind of a scenario that might get at some of these, the big brother and intrusive and overload types of problems, where you just basically say, for the next 48 hours, I can be more interrupted, I can be more viewed. It's an agreement that everybody would make.
Right. I think that's definitely when people talk about almost the project or task-centric view, perhaps one of the tasks is, okay, for the next 48 hours, let's work on these 4 things at your convenience, at your timing.
And then some of the problems, the rants that people have might be reduced because they've sort of bought into it for a short time. Yeah.
And also, I think when you show the demo to the focus group, I'm not sure because it's not very clear to me the user of this site will have the control of when do you want to go into the site, when do you want to leave? Am I always on the site, or it's my choice to be there, or I can leave? That's not very clear. That may contribute to the low score of the whole concept itself.
I think one way to maybe get people to be to have it on more is to, because I mean, this, you can think of this a little bit as a chat extension to SharePoint, and a different direction to look at it from might be a SharePoint extension to chat, where you kind of have, you know, a sidebar, part of your chat thing where you have your buddy list that most people are probably running all the time anyway, and then you have a section which might be documents or sites that you're involved in, and it might have a color or something, and then people will turn that color or have an indicator come up when they're in that room, and then you can, just like when you have a conversation group in Messenger, like it could be treated more like that, and that's a paradigm people are already, you know, using and familiar with, so it might be easier to kick in and kick out.
Yep, good idea.
That there's a single team site and it's a relatively small number of people that are participating on it. Do you anticipate that a team site would grow to be quite large, or do you anticipate that an individual user would actually participate in multiple team sites, or is this really more representative of the real world?
Well, I think there's going to be a mix of both, and I think it goes back to the size theme where, you know, if this was a team site with 50 people, could you have this audio channel open for everyone to hear what was happening? Well, probably not.
Even is it just practical for you to get notifications of things that are being updated and things? I mean, it just goes crazy, it seems like, once you get to be a reasonably large number of people.
Yeah, so some people came up with the ideas of, well, I need this site before I get here that has a number of rooms with different tasks. And I enter that room, almost like a conference room. I enter it, and there might be 4 or 5 people there and a set of tasks and maybe an audio conference for these different rooms. And I can select which one I go into. That was something some people just offered up as, wow, it would be great. That would be one way to address a larger team group. But I think that's definitely an issue. So the last concept I'll talk to is an idea of smart buddy lists. And this addresses a similar problem as Think Tank, but in a much more integrated and contextual way. A way to find people and expertise much, much easier.
Susan works as an investment sales manager for Contoso Limited, a financial services company. Using new technologies, Susan is able to find people and information quickly based on their expertise, interests, and business relationship to her company. All of this helps her to find information and make connections. Let's look at how it helps Susan prepare an investment proposal for her clients. Susan opens her proposal template and proceeds to fill out all the details. As she navigates to the main section of the document, her list of instant messaging contacts, her buddy list, updates dynamically based on the context of the document she is working on. Buddies appear, these are experts from her company, including investment analysts and other sales professionals. Each name represents a group with the numbers in parentheses letting her know how many people are available and how many are currently online. Of course, her personal buddy list is also available in case she needs it. As Susan continues to work on the document, these smart buddies will continue to appear and help her get her job done. Susan continues working on her proposal and starts a section on bond investment choices. After typing this heading, she notices a new buddy called Bond Experts appear. Since Susan needs some additional information for this section, she decides to contact an expert. She notices that there are several bond experts currently online and decides to send an instant message to John, who she happens to know. John sees her request and gives her some great information to include in her proposal. Susan uses the information and finishes up this section of the document. Next, Susan needs to develop a set of mutual fund choices for her clients. She fills in her initial thoughts on the benefits that mutual funds can provide and enters some important criteria to consider given today's market environment. While considering additional criteria to include, she notices a smart buddy called Mutual Fund Analysts appear. She decides to confirm the investment criteria with this group and sends a quick instant message. Since she sent the message to the entire group, she gets responses from multiple people. After chatting with several mutual fund analysts, she is confident that she has all the information needed to make the best recommendation and finishes up this section of the document. Next, Susan needs to recommend some specific funds. After entering in a new heading in her proposal, she sees a group of mutual fund companies appear. The text "External" indicates that the contacts are outside of her company. She is able to mouse over the buddies and see basic profile information and even a link to their corporate website. She is familiar with funds from trade research and their reputation is good, so she decides to request some more information. The auto-reply indicates that she will get an automated response based on her question. She sends the instant message requesting information on a specific class of mutual funds. She gets an auto-reply with a list of matching funds and a link to instantly start an IM session with a live customer sales representative. She copies the list of suggested funds into her document and puts the finishing touches on the proposal. With the proposal completed, she saves the final version of the document. Finally, Susan wants to distribute this proposal. To help her do this, she had already created a community of interest comprised of her clients. The community is a group of people that Susan feels would have an interest in hearing about new investment options her company may have to offer. Susan can see there are 8 community members, of which 4 are currently online. She decides to send the proposal to the group in an instant message. Bill, one of Susan's clients, receives her instant message. He is always interested in new investment choices and is pleased to get the new proposal. After looking at the document, Bill asks Susan if she has time to discuss it right away. Susan excitedly replies, "Of course." Susan was able to use the Smart Buddy List technology to locate experts and contacts internal and external to her organization, all without having to leave the context of her work.
So, Smart Buddy Lists. Overall, across the 5 concepts we showed, it did get the lowest score. And that's surprising because finding people, was one of the top pain points. And really the reasons revolve around issues of accuracy, security, and the idea of incentives for experts. So first of all, accuracy. The concept showed Susan interacting with people who are bond experts or mutual fund experts, and it showed a little bit of a stretch case or stretch scenario. But people brought up examples of, well, if I find someone who is, say, a legal expert or an expert in some more confidential subject or topic, then if I send that person confidential information, then I need to be sure that that person really is an expert and really does have the authority to help me on that task. And that goes back to a credibility issue that people felt that needed to be solved. The second idea was an idea of security, and that some people want to be found, some people should be found, some people shouldn't maybe be found for knowing certain things. So you don't, for example, if you're working on an M&A deal and someone types in the name of a target company and you're working on the deal, you don't want your name necessarily to come up to anyone. So being able to rein in the scope for what could be found was another requirement. Another idea was this overarching idea of incentives for experts. People felt that if they were an individual contributor, they maybe had expertise in a couple areas, then yeah, this is hugely valuable to be able to get my work done better. But if people were an expert, they felt that, well, what's my incentive to be found in this system? So they needed some sort of a way to see the benefit. And if people felt that if it was their job, for example, if they were a product support person and it was their job to respond to requests of their business partners, well, that's the incentive, doing my job better. But if they weren't, if they were, say, a lawyer or a marketing person or a finance person, what is the incentive in being found? And some of those issues kept people from seeing some of the value or some of the uses for this type of technology. In terms of what did stand out, of course, finding people internally stood out as something that was a major pain point. We saw that with the think tank, and it definitely rang true here. Searching across external experts was slightly lower, but actually it was even more important for BDMs. So BDMs that actually did interact more with customers or clients or partners found external experts actually to be one of the more important features there. So those are the 5 concepts, and what I just want to leave you with is a quick recap on some of the opportunities and challenges. In terms of opportunities, all of the concepts had clear value propositions. We have a lot of research around scenarios people offered up around potential uses for each of the concepts, key benefits, key drawbacks. But people did see the benefits fairly clearly with very little coaching in most cases, particularly around better document collaboration and around finding people and expertise more efficiently and more accurately. I think equally important to this, and something we need to work on from a technology perspective, is not just better collaboration, better real-time collaboration, but better control. So areas around giving the owner of a document better control over what happens, better tracking of edits in a co-editing scenario or multi-party application sharing scenario, as well as security around those scenarios, and accuracy in terms of finding people, recommending experts, making sure that that's as accurate as possible. Those contingencies, as you can tell from the ranking in the concepts, almost trumped some of the real-time collaboration features in the sense of if they weren't there, people seemed less likely to adopt just due to those concerns. So those are challenges we definitely need to work through. The last point is really the asymmetry. So in thinking about end users and their needs, think about them in terms of people who use the technology today, people who don't, as well as the scope of decision-making authority, because thinking about those 2 variables really will skew the top pain points they have. So that's all I have. So I'm going to open it up. Any other final questions or comments that people might have? I definitely know some of you have great ideas, and I want to continue this discussion. This gives you a high-level overview in terms of the concepts, but this is really a starting point. So we'd love to work with you all more closely going forward. So the concepts are available. I'll make sure this link gets sent around. My alias is R. Raman, so please send me an email if you'd like to follow up. And that's it. So any questions?
Sorry, I just you guys are part of Office, that's part of future version, future features.
So we're part of Jeff Rake's organization in Information Worker, real-time collaboration. And these are forward-looking exploratory concepts.
Does the current Office, I noticed that what you do depends on existing, around the document. Does the existing object model of Office or the existing things you can get out of Word or PowerPoint allows you to do these rich scenarios? Or is there a barrier here?
Like for the co-editing?
For the co-editing or for mining the document as you type whatever new terms comes.
Mining, I'm not sure. I think there are some things around that can do the mining. But the co-editing support is not.
But there is a concept called the live data. I think you and some other folks in RTC are trying to invest on. That's trying to build a building block for multi-user document editing across different Office documents, Access, Word, or PowerPoint. And if you look at today's OneNote, in your Service Pack 1, you already can have the co-editing experience.
Inside OneNote, but not inside Word, I would say.
Not inside Word.
I think there needs, I'm not sure, but I think there actually needs to be support in Word, for example, in the storage model. It has the whole data model has to understand that there can be multiple people. Right? Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that
And when you think about the track changes model, so how does that transfer to a real-time environment? There might need to be some fundamental changes there that we'll need to explore.